Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I just kind of wanted to do a 2023 year-end wrap-up. I've done a lot of end-of-the-year content this year, so I wanted to do one last video and kind of wrap it up with a nice bow. So I went ahead and pulled some information from Storygraph. It's a little bit messed up. For some reason it would not import two of my books from Goodreads, but Storygraph does make some nice little graphs for you, so I went ahead and used those. So for whatever reason it would not include The Way of a Dan by Philip Chase and Impact Winter Season 2. So just keep that in mind when I put the graphs up there. So I did read 68 books this year, which came out to be about 24,000 pages. And I think the book count is a little bit higher because I did read a lot of shorter books this year. So if you look at this graph, over half, or exactly 50% of my books were under 300 pages. So a lot of the books that would be included there are some of the Expanse novellas and some of the James Bond books in particular. Those were some very short books that I read. Those Expanse novellas, some of them are like 75 pages, maybe even less. So that definitely got some. And some of the Sanderson stuff, like what is it called? The Sixth of the Dusk, and some of those, the 11th Metal, Secret History is a little bit longer, but even a lot of the Sanderson stuff that I read was also very short. I will also say, I do say pages and I read, but 90% of the stuff that I read is actually me listening to it on audio. That is 100% my preferred way to consume a book. It is, my ranking would be audio, ebook, and then the physical, like paperback or hardback version. For whatever reason, I do not enjoy reading out of a physical book anymore. So keep that in mind also. And none of these stats include any of the manga I read this year, which I did read a lot of it in like the first half of this year. Berserk, Vinland Saga, some Vagabond, a few other ones, some One Piece was in there, Boruto, My Hero, even more. But none of this will include any of that. I really did fall off in the second half of the year. I was just not in the mood for reading manga for whatever reason. So this is strictly just like books. So of those 68 books, 3 of them were 5 stars. I had 31 4 stars, 31 3 stars, 3 2 stars, and this year, thankfully, no 1-star books, which is always a great thing. And I do think it's kind of interesting that my 3 and 4 star books were even. I always say my ranking system is supposed to be like a slightly tilted bell curve. And what I mean by that is only a very small amount of books are ever going to be 5-star. Only a very small amount are going to be a 1-star. And then most of them are going to be in that 3 and 4 star range, which this year makes sense. And I think, you know what a bell curve looks like, but I always think it should be pushed up a little bit because obviously I'm going out of my way to try and read things that I think I'm going to like. So it is a slightly bumped up bell curve. If you have been following my channel pretty closely this year, this will not be a surprise to anybody, but my most read author this year was Brandon Sanderson, and I read 30 books by Brandon Sanderson this year. So almost 50% of all of the books that I read were by Sanderson. So if you look at the graph that is on screen, the author Rick Hawkskin is actually the author or graphic novelist for the White Sands graphic novel, so that's why he's there. So those actually go to Brandon Sanderson in my book at least. So yeah, what an incredible journey the Cosmere was. It was definitely something. I'm finally caught up, and I am now in the great waiting list for Stormlight 5, and then after that it really looks like it will be quite a while. So it's like I caught up at the perfect time for Stormlight 5, but also at the worst time because I'm going to be in a sanderless desert for a little while, like 2028 or something, I think, or something like that is when I think Mistborn Era 3 is supposed to come out. So I will definitely be suffering with everybody else now. After Sanderson, my next most read author is actually a tie with Ian Fleming, who is the author of the James Bond books. And that was also an interesting experience. I liked so many of the books so much. Some of them were just really fantastic. One made my top 10 books of the year, and then other ones are some of my most disappointing reads of the year. Really the whole gambit from Ian Fleming on the quality of his books, the quality of his stories, characters, just everything. I do recommend some of the James Bond books, and then there are other ones that I really think most people should avoid and just go watch the movie because they are definitely better. And then James S.A. Corey, also with 8 this year. I did read a decent amount of The Expanse this year. It was definitely earlier on in the year. A lot of this number comes from the novellas that I mentioned earlier. I think I only read 3 or 4 full-length Expanse novels this year, but there were definitely a lot of these short stories mixed in as well. What a great series. I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in a big sprawling space opera that, and I say this loosely, that is realistic. And what I mean by that is there's no Star Wars warp driving, that level laser, well, I mean, there's definitely advanced technology, but for whatever reason, it just felt like this was a more realistic interpretation of how humanity would just move into space and like how things would be handled and how the politics would happen and just all that kind of stuff. I really do think it's amazing. And obviously The Expanse brought me my favorite book of the year, my second favorite book of all time, with book 8, Time Match Wrath. So, I mean, just for that book alone, I am going to recommend The Expanse for pretty much everybody. And then after those 3 authors, the next highest I read from anyone was 2 books, and that includes the likes of Blake Crouch, Giles Christensen, Will White, Philip Chase, and Jenny Wirtz. Those were all some other authors that I read more than one book from. Obviously with Sanderson just taking up so much of my reading time this year. It is crazy to think that I read that many books from one author this year. I honestly hope to never do that again, because that just seems like way too much. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I would like to be more diverse going into 2024. And then I just kind of wanted to go over my books of the month for 2023. In January, we had my first foray into Sanderson with The Final Empire. February was Boy's Life, which is one of my 5-star reads. March, Time Match Wrath. Man, what back-to-back month. Great 5 stars. April was Leviathan Falls. May, The Way of Kings. June, Words of Radiance. July, The Bands of Mourning. So that did not make my top 10 list, but I thought that book was just about as good as most of the stuff in Era 1, if not a little bit better, especially probably better than The Well of Ascension. Wasn't the biggest fan of that one, but Bands of Mourning was a really good one for me. August was The Ships of Merior by Jenny Wirtz. I'm really glad to see that some of these books are not ones that made it onto my top 10, but definitely do deserve some recognition, because The Ships of Merior was a difficult book for me. It took me over 250 days to finish that book, but it was really good. The writing, just fantastic. The story, I really felt connected with the characters in this book. After the first one, I was kind of on the fence about it, but the second one really did make me just connect with the characters on a level that was not there from Curse of the Mistwraith. In September, we had Oathbringer, and then in October, we had Rhythm of War, and then November, we had Starter Villain. And for December, another Sanderson book, The Sunlit Man. December, I didn't read all that much. I will be doing a December wrap-up here, see if maybe I fit 1 or 2 more books in. I probably won't. That's not normally something I do. I'm pretty much done. Give myself a little bit of a reading break before I really trudge ahead for 2024. And I've already mentioned it a few times, but just to be clear, Time Match Wrath was my book of the year, which is awesome. The Expanse went from a series that I thought was really good to just fantastic, and I'm so glad that Time Match Wrath was just everything and more that I wanted from a book. And overall, my rankings were an average of a 3.53. So basically, like I said, a little bit greater than average, which is where I think I like to keep most of my ranking. Obviously, I would love for everything I read to be a 5-star. I mean, that would just be fantastic, but that is not really how I rank things. So if I could read that many special books, man, that would be awesome. But let me know any interesting stats that you have for 2023, maybe your favorite books, how much you read, how little you read, some disappointments, all that fun stuff. Let me know down in the comments. And as always, have a good one.